Thank you, and appreciate that, Frank. And
you are the king of the Mardi Gras.
move. Okay. So, moon pies, huh?
Food pies.
Okay. So,
Feel free to have one.
are they non-caloric or
Yes,
they?
those are
Okay.
food pies.
Yes, yes. Because we want to be healthy eaters. Yes, we want to be very healthy if we can. So, I'm assuming that the folks who are going on crusade were also concerned about their health issues, but we'll see about that. There's no doubt that for many, the Crusades are the major event of the medieval period, but I'm not sure so much to the society as a whole, but they certainly are one that cheesy movies have been made about, quite a few, many of them a bit romantic, I think you would agree. And they don't show us necessarily how very gruesome they were and how horrible. I think it was probably 30 or 40 years ago, an American statesman actually used the term crusade to refer to an American military expedition in that region. And boy, I mean, the reaction was not good at all. The word crusade, even now, has, and I'm sure these folks were not necessarily students of the Middle Ages, but the word has caught on and refers to the United States as well as to Europe in a highly negative way. So that is what we're going to talk about. And we look at the map, and it is all sadly too familiar to us now. This shows us the top four crusades, shall I call them? There's a fifth, sixth, and seventh, but time does not permit us, or interest, I would think. Once we have the fourth, I think we get the point of where these are going. But I think the lines will show you how they varied by land and by sea as we are aware of them. And I mean, like Frank was saying, we just can't imagine what the journeys must have been like when we think about the days before flying, because this was very, very difficult. And all, of course, in the 11th, 12th centuries, really just the 12th and early 13th. And of course, we're aware that Constantinople was right there and still a quote unquote Christian city, albeit of the brand X variety. And more about that later. And of course, who would ever forget, who would want to forget Sicily? Because we think about Sicily a lot, because we couldn't be medieval without being Sicilian. Let's face it, anything that's good comes out of Sicily. There's so much. Yeah, I'm pushing here. Yeah, well, a lot of things, but all of this is to say that the Sicilians have a great deal to do with the Crusades, no doubt about that, as well as much else that's part of the medieval world. Now, historians of the Crusades, and there are many, will tell you a lot of different things, so I've tried to organize them and give you a few of them. the first, of course, is emphasized in your book. You might look at that about the idea Christian / Catholic. Yeah, because that's very important here. The idea is that during these centuries, there's that increasing sense of the other. I'm it and you're not, and therefore this is very important. Because you are different, we attack you. Now you could go all the way back, I guess, to Charlemagne and the Carolingians and the attack down there. But that is also, of course, of a piece with taking lands. We want to expand. I mean, you know about the history of the United States and going west, right? We get more and more. Secondly, as is often said, increasing hatred of Islam and concern about the pilgrims. Remember, by this point, people who are not particularly tolerant of Christians taking over Jerusalem, meaning Turks. And so prior to that, apparently, Christian pilgrims, and of course they still go there, maybe not now, but they normally do, as you know, maybe some of you have been there. You will understand, of course, that the result is that this increases, they say, during the 11th century, the hatred of them. And third, of course, we never forget, and remember, everybody knows about Gregory VII and Henry IV, and how that was very unpleasant. I mean, if you're a pope and you had an emperor like that, or a king, he was never an emperor, a real emperor, you say, how can we avoid him? Well, they did a very nice job all the way from that period until the early 12th century. So in this period, the very end of the 11th century, you know, it's like you have your own king and I've got my own pope. It's like we really, really dislike you. So if you got that kind of situation, and that's going on now in this period that we're about to consider. Now, Gregory VII died 1085, 1073 to 1085, just in case you need to remember that. And I know my star student back there, she's going to remember all this. You know, you think hat in hand, pretty please. I know we've had our differences, but I think I love you and all of the rest. The sycophant who says to me, I know I should have studied for that first test, but can I get a B because I'm going to make a D in organic chemistry? So I understand how Byzantine emperors sort of had to say to the Pope, you know, I really love you. I know there were some harsh words exchanged at times, but I just want to kiss your foot. I really love you. Because it's clear that this whole business of the Turks are really scary and you are very important. Kiss, kiss. Are we talking about some cheek licking? Yes, a lot of it. And I'm sure the popes enjoyed that at the time. Like you said, you say you're sorry. How sorry are you? You know, that kind of thing. But that doesn't amount to anything tangible at that particular point. However, we'll consider it. We're thinking about it. You know how people will do you. I'll look at it. I'll look at all your work and decide if I should do that. Next, of course, the idea of people who are not going to inherit the estate, meaning you're not the oldest. And there are lots of them. But you can imagine if you were not going to become the king or the duke, there's a lot of responsibility on your part to get out there and make something of yourself. That's unfortunate if you were the youngest, because you will understand it's up to you. And the idea is that these people were frisky and out there because they did not have everything set up for them, which I think is an interesting idea, to think about all these people are, shall we say, available for travel. You know, you'd put them on the job market nowadays because you don't have the family business. It's up to you to go out there. So that's the idea of being young and frisky and ready to do something. And how much did they really know about the Eastern world? Probably not a lot, except it's all there and waiting for us. And so, and we want to do this for the Lord anyway. Yeah. I mean, the Lord, big one, and little Lord too, big Lord, little Lord. The idea, I put that phrase because many of you will remember it from back in the day, Law and Order, not just the series. I mean, I'm thinking here of the idea of my day, this period. I mean, it's like peace of God, truce of God. In case you don't remember that, it has to do with protecting civilians during times of war. Peace of God, it's not fair to attack monks and nuns, and it's not fair to have a war on Sunday or not fighting, or during Lent to stay home and eat your moon pie, but you do not more or less go out and fight. In other words, for obvious reasons, the church is trying to cut back on fighting and that kind of thing. So the theory is that we're trying to send all of the people who like to work out at the gym, we're trying to send all of them to the east, right? Because they need something to do. Well, you want to hurt people? Go. Yeah, we want you to. We're forming a society for the hurting of bad folks. So y'all stop hurting each other, because you ain't heavy, you my brother, you remember? Yeah, so that's sort of the idea. The idea of the Law and Order, because I think we don't need to read a bunch of novels, but I just read one about people really are fighting and yes, hurting each other. And it's not like reaching out in Christian love. So those are all quote unquote factors, and it's up to us to decide which we think is important. But I will say this, that if I had been a Byzantine, I would have thought by this period, because they'd been making those appeals for quite a while. Mansa Kurt, the battle, you can see the lines there, the red and green. The most amazing events there would occur when the Turks actually captured the emperor, which is very embarrassing. It's sort of terminal for him, but in essence, it is disastrous. Now, that's 271, 1071, and you think, gosh, that is so close to the reign of Gregory VII. Yes. Think about that. He became Pope in 1073, 2 years later. I think there's a big connection there because the circumstances, at Byzantine military central are not good. The Turks are coming. And I mean, it's like, really. So look at that land, and you think of Asia Minor, and you think of where that is. So you are dealing with almost Constantinople and surrounding area, and that's about it. And so what put the Turks off to, as you well know, 1453, that was about to come out. I could just see you were already thinking, what caused them to wait? Well, part of it, of course, was the appeal. Now, this interesting Byzantine painting, iconoclastic figure, is they never look very happy, do they? But the idea is, I guess they shouldn't, because it's not a real good time. His name was Alexius Comnenus. He was the emperor after Damansegurt. He had become the emperor, and you can see 1081. So the emperor prior to him died in captivity. So that's how he became emperor. So now, if he's going to have an empire, he better get ready. But interestingly, we have a very, very interesting source, and this will become one of the great primary sources. You think about translations and how many that went through from Greek to Latin to all of the spoken languages of today. In a Penguin edition available for you, okay? And again, it's fascinating, isn't it, to think in that day and age that there was a female scholar, Anna, his daughter, and it's not exactly an unbiased account, but a very, very important one, because talk about highly unusual to have work, because mostly, you remember the Abbot Suger who wrote The Life of Louis the Fat and people like that. I mean, yes, you have lots of those kinds of memoirs, but to have a biography from a female and writing about her father, and of course she's going to say he's great, he's wonderful, and so forth and so on. But anyway, that version was probably what, $2.95 or something. Yeah, we can think about the good old days, but I don't believe if you find it for $2.95, don't buy it, because can you imagine the condition it would be in? Not usable, I would think. The idea, though, is that he would ask for help starting during the reign of Gregory VII, and he wouldn't, of course, you can imagine the letters he would send. Oh, heir of Peter, we venerate you. We love you so much. And all of the various kinds of hypocritical things people would say in those kinds of epistles. He said, these awful, hateful Turks are coming. And I think he probably tried to avoid any. How do you like being kicked around by Germans? How you liking that? No, I don't think we bring up any unpleasantry. We just say the Turks are so bad and they hate you and they hate me. And I think that means we should love each other a lot more. And so that's the idea. And finally in the 1090s, someone who is called Urban II comes along. He is a follower devotedly of Pope Gregory VII. He's ethnic French. I wanted to say that to you so you wouldn't start singing the Marseillaise or something. I just really ethnic. Okay. He's from down south and he's a Cluniac monk, highly educated. I know you didn't ask for the biography, but just say that he is also a big believer. Yeah, if he had t-shirts back then, it would have been, I love Hildebrand, that kind of thing. Very much in that movement. And don't you mention a German to him. So, Urban was now Pope, and he was getting those, nice letters from the Byzantines. And he begins to think, this would be a way to show those nasty Germans what real losers they are. That I will reach out to my Greek friends and say, I know you're worried, and I worry for you. You're really very nice people. You think, how could that be? Well, interestingly, in other cases, popes would have said to the Germans, well, you are the Holy Roman Emperor, so you should be leading this. And what if the Germans didn't get that letter in the mail? Nobody sent me. I didn't know about a crusade. Nine. Where they didn't send me an SOS. That's very hurtful because we don't like you. So what happens, of course, is Urban's more or less going to go to his homeland and request the help. This is the famous Council of Clermont. Many of you probably been to Clermont, and so you are familiar with the city where we used to have, I think it was run by the Department of Foreign Languages, so people could improve their French, and it was quite a nice campus down there. But Clermont would be famous in medieval history because he gave one of the most significant, I would say, speeches. If you want to have persuasive oratory or that kind of thing, it's real. You can read various versions. There are 4 accounts of this speech. They're, more or less, but there was no steno there who could get it exactly. So you have different versions, but they're all, of course, rah, rah, sis, boom, bah. Okay, go get the Turks. And of course, there's a lot of this kind of persuasive oratory. I call out to you, you miscreant youth. You've been out there partying. You've been engaged in lethargy, sloth, lust, pinball machines, the whole, everything you can think of that wanton youth are occasion to do. And you need to do something that's right because God's watching you. And now I'm going to offer you that opportunity. I mean, he must have really, what the staff, the papal staff must have worked really hard on this. Yeah, because they would say, when he said, do we want to go? Do we want to do this? They say Davis, Wolf, whatever language they happen to be using. And it was a predominantly French audience, I would have to say. God wills it, God wills it. And so everybody was very excited. Can you imagine if they had had television back then and they could have put it on all the channels? And it was quite a performance by Urban II. But the idea is, again, it does not seem to encourage the Germans or other people. This is all about the French. So now what do we do? Well, most of the people who were part of what we would call the ruling class now prepared. Then they would spend a year or two in preparation because obviously the necessity of getting everything together. And so it would take a year or two before people could even think about going all that distance. This does not mean everybody, however, because there was a preliminary move of the mass of people. Yeah, and I mean by that, people who were simply, well, it's hard to say, except there was individuals who may have been what later with societies would call professional agitators, will get them excited, but they were totally unprepared and not in any way fit for military service. And they went right on. And this would be 1096, I mean, almost immediately. And we assumed they were individuals who did not have any military means to speak of. I mean, it's not as if all they really have is fanaticism and zeal. Zeal for, I guess, destruction, killing, and they are zealots. And they said, according to the study of the Byzantine emperor, when he looked and saw these people out of the gates of Constantinople, he said, yikes. These are not attractive people. These do not seem to be. I didn't know that there was going to be someone like that. So thanks for coming, fella. This is really nice of you to stop by. Turks go that way. If you want to find some Turks, oh, they're mean, but y'all, I want to wish y'all all the best. And so maybe have the head of the Orthodox Church say a prayer for them because they would need it. They would be quickly eliminated by Turks after crossing the Bosphorus. Of course, they were. It's very odd, and I mean, I hate to make light of these people because they were killing Jews, killing all kinds of people on the way. They were not. I guess it's sort of like they have no sense except just to do violent things. I mean, that is sadly not ended in the world, but that's why I call them hordes, which seems rather demeaning, but in a sense, they are not there for any particularly nice purpose, I would think. At least I've yet to find it. Now comes the official crusade. they were called francs, and the sources, whether you go to the source on the Lexis Comnenus or any other source, you always find them referred to as francs. So are they francs? To a great extent, but not exclusively. But that just becomes a general term. If you're, I suppose, if you're Byzantine, you say, well, they're all the same to me. I can't tell the difference. Isn't that funny? We hear that sometimes. But yeah, those francs, so we don't say, well, I wonder which ethnicity he comes from. They don't worry about that. They've got their identification taken care of. They're all francs. You've seen one, you've seen them all. So there they are, and they're coming. And we can only, again, when they finally arrive, which would be about 1097, I would think. When they finally arrive outside the gate, he says, oh, hi, fellas, glad y'all are here. But he really does want them to get them moving on. And he said, now you understand the plan. You were here to push the Turks way back, and you are to continue to help us, and we really appreciate it. And of course, they're saying, oh, sure, that's just what we want to do. Of course, that wasn't just what they were there for, but were they prevaricating? Yes, I fear they were. This is a very famous fellow, Robert of Normandy. And he was one of the leaders because this is not a crusade of kings. This will be largely a crusade of people who have something they need to get, which is more power. Robert of Normandy is one of the people that you may remember if you were here when I talked about his uncle Odo and William the Conqueror. He was the son who never grew up, and his father, I don't think, cared for him too much, so he had to make him Duke of Normandy, but didn't give him the kingship of England. So Robert was, I guess you would say, rather flighty. So he left the situation. I mean, he said, it'll be waiting for me, so I'm going to be king of England. But hey, I think I'll go on crusade. So, I mean, this would be a great little project. I've got just more opportunities. I'm young. Why don't I do all of it? The world's my oyster. So that's Robert, and he will become very, very significant. He'll end up spending, as some of you know, his later years behind bars. Yeah. I mean, not at a penal institution, but this more because for political reasons, and come back next year and we'll talk about that in terms of English history. But he was the Duke of Normandy, and he's all done up, all looking all heroic, and that is the idea, though. And of course, he will have much to crow about when he gets back home, back to France mainly. And that is, we won. Because again, this is the victory, so everything else is downhill, isn't it? Well, First Crusade, one of the bloodiest and most horrific sieges ever. But the goal was, whether or not this was part of the Byzantine plan, was that they would take Jerusalem and they had to massacre a lot of people, Jews and Muslims, and it becomes infamous for that reason. And this will all take place. I mean, they were not at all a partisan in who got killed. I mean, it's a general massacre, and it was a very successful one for their side. But that is merely one illustration and of many that was supposed to indicate how people of the city tried to protect themselves. And again, this is against a Seljuk Turkish ruled city. The city was controlled, of course, by that point by the Turks, because the Muslim world was not at all solidified. They had their divisions as well, but in any event, that was the big news for the Crusaders. Subsequently, and this is what interests me so much, is the creation of these so-called Crusader kingdoms. And of course, we all think about this part of the world right now, don't we? And you look at all of those red areas on the map and think about how the Crusaders now divided up. And they do this. It looks, again, as we all know on maps, it always looks a lot better than it really is. But you see, there are these kingdoms, Edessa, Antioch, Tripoli, and Jerusalem. So they're splitting it up in those four kingdoms. And you say, gee, I wonder what kind of people were the rulers. You think maybe they were Catholic Europeans? I think so. Yeah, you got that part right. And then who is under them? Well, everybody else. That is, whoever survived the massacres. But those are the areas, and if I had been a Turk, I would have moved, okay? I've gotten the van, and somebody had the movers there because I don't think my presence would be welcome. But you wonder about the people who were there must have been real quiet and industrious, because that they were the rulers. I mean, some Europeans, that is Franks, went back home. I mean, like Robert of Normandy, he's not going to stay around there. I think I'll just have a new life. I mean, in a Hollywood script, yeah, but in reality, I've done the thing. I've killed, I massacred, I looted, a great time, but I need to get back to Europe. Yeah, it's been real. And so, but let's talk about the veterans here. There are people who are going to say, yeah, this sounds really good. We can have a new life here. Dare I call it imperialism, colonialism? I think I will. Yeah, if you don't mind. And they'll establish these kingdoms. And you know what they'll do? And this is what excites me so much about these kingdoms. They'll establish it according to Western feudal principles. Yeah, I mean, like in Western Europe itself, they had to sort of extemporize because, you know, they didn't have a model to go by. But now these people have, that's the way daddy did it, granddaddy did it, so I'll do it that way too. In other words, this becomes, forgive my excitement, but it's that feudal law, this is where it comes from. It's like they have this down, this whole paragon, feudal paragon, it's like the king of Jerusalem, who's Flemish, by the way, he's Count Baldwin, but he becomes the king now, and he will be the feudal lord. So if you are the Count of Edessa, Tripoli, you are his vassals. So you say, can he really enforce this? Well, not so much, but that's the theory, that he is super lord and he has his vassals and they have vassals. And I mean, in other words, if you were teaching, high school history, this would be the perfect role model, because in theory, it all worked out. Everybody, rear vassals, vassals and vassals. You have all those lines, and then everybody else works. So these are the kingdoms. They last less than a century, but they, starting with Edessa, will gradually fall to the Turks. But for the most part, the 12th century, we'll see them exist, and then you understand. I mean, I always think of the British in India, or maybe even the Americans in the Philippines. You just think about this whole class of people who are sort of like the rulers, but you're not from around here, are you? It's like all these people who are in these kingdoms are being controlled by them. So that goes on, and so that results. Now, you see the green. So you realize there's still some land that is Byzantine. And you wonder, but what about Constantinople? I'm thinking maybe there's some hurt feelings there, because this was not part of the plan, okay? So it's like, I don't know how you say it in Greek, but it's like, you all played dirty. How can we trust you? We probably are going to not get along too well after this happened, because we thought you were going to save us and then take care of everything, and instead you took over. So the Byzantine Empire goes on, and in a way, but not very well. Meanwhile, starting with Edessa, the various areas are going to, shall we say, have major problems in survival, because it is a pretty lonely place if you're a Western colonialist in the Middle East, I would think. You don't have a lot of friends. And you see down there in Egypt, these are people who are called Fatimids. They are supposedly descended from Muhammad's daughter, as you know, Fatima. And that's what they claim anyway. And they don't like Turks either. It's not, I love all my friends. But you got Fatimids in Egypt, and then you have the Turks to the east and north, and they're not any warm and cuddly. Okay. So all of this is to say that these kingdoms are surrounded by enemies, and their demise is sure, sooner or later. But they're all going to be destroyed. That, of course, again, to repeat, just makes the whole feudal law system and all of that very transitory. It's there, but it's as significant merely for its interest in the history of law as it is for reality. But they were all, I suppose, equipped with their own groups of attorneys and legal experts who could work all the details of this out. Because when you read it, do not get in a lazy boy when you do read it. The whole code of feudal law used in the Crusader states, you might get sleepy, okay? Arms and wolfers. So, there were the states, and by the end of the 1100s, goodbye feudal states. It's been real, but it didn't last. And but we're aware of those, but it doesn't mean they're going back necessarily to the Byzantines. It means they'll either go to the Egyptian Fatimids or they will go to the Turks, this particular land. And if I were one of those Franks, I'd be headed home. But, you know, that's always the way it is when you think about it. They've been there so long because that's kind of their home, if you think about it. All those people, expatriates, I guess you would say nowadays. It's like this is where we live. I mean, a lot of them grew up there. But anyway, those Crusader states lasted until the end of the 1100s in some state. But you got to figure that they were not very popular with the people over whom they ruled. I mean, it had not been warm and cuddly because I guess they had different ways of worship. If many of them were Muslim, I suppose, or perhaps Greek Christian. And you say, well, but we all love Jesus. I don't think that's enough necessarily. So we got problems. Then, shockingly, comes what the church is just dismayed by, and that's the fall of Jerusalem. The fall of Jerusalem came as a kind of event that made people, especially those of the clergy, we have sinned, and this is the punishment God puts on people for their wrongdoing. So what we need to do is go back and get it right this time. Yep. And God will forgive us for our wrong because we want Jerusalem to be a Christian city. This, of course, speaking of the beautiful Ellen of Aquitaine, or I suppose she was beautiful, she certainly makes up, she has some wonderful couturiers and hairstylists. We can see a beautiful picture of her. She and her husband, her first husband, Louis VII, went on this crusade, and I'm sure you can understand that for a queen to be on a crusade as opposed to the only females traditionally who went were camp followers or people of that sort. And for someone of Eleanor's stature to be there was highly unusual, highly. However, regardless of that, Louis and Eleanor's marriage fell apart, so it was said, during that crusade. And when they returned home, it was annulled, and she went on to bigger and better things. And capping off, it was not a successful crusade. So what can I say about the Second Crusade? As little as possible. We just move on because it will be the third one, the Third Crusade. Movies, oh God, all the movies and novels with probably some very attractive people who are passionately in love. Probably, you know, Catholic loves Muslim, and the result, the love that dare not speak its name. I don't know, but whatever, it absolutely fascinates me because this, of course, involves Richard the Lionhearted. Now, remember Robert of Normandy? So they are definitely related on down the line because Robert had been William's son. And so he's sort of like a great uncle. In any event, as some of you will be well aware, Richard spent very little time in England itself because he was either in France or on what would be called the Third Crusade. And again, the purpose of the Third Crusade was to accomplish what the Second did not. It was an interesting crusade in that, yeah, the German emperor did go on the second, but this particular emperor, we all know, called Barbarossa, didn't make it because he drowned on the way. So that's one of your footnotes. I guess when you're dying there, you're thinking, gosh, this will get in my biographies, that I died of drowning. And maybe he died so he didn't think about it, because that's a rather tragic ending to a brilliant career. However, the kings of England and France both made it there. And while the king of France left after a while because he wanted to stir things up, Richard became, you notice it's sometimes called the King's Crusade, became synonymous with this crusade. He made a deal with the Turkish leader. Some of you know him as Saladin, very romantic Islamic leader of the day. And they made a deal about Christian pilgrims and probably went to a banquet or had a feast or I don't know what all. But it all ended very nicely. But a funny thing happened to Richard on the way to going home. And this is what will really hurt you. He was captured, I know, by the emperor. That is rude. I mean, it's rude and nefarious. I could just say a lot of things about Barbarossa's son, but hurtful. Henry VI, he locked him up. And you say, why? Lucre. Yeah, lucre, the filth of lucre. We just want money. You would get one of our own, one of your Christian brothers, and you would hold it for ransom. I can't believe you. You hall of shame for you.
Sure.
Yeah, it's where you got. Yeah. So that was the idea, though. And luckily, of course, Richard and your mother, the mother, Eleanor, would have a fundraiser and would come up with, oh yeah, that's a lot of donuts, right? I mean, we know about those fundraisers, but yeah, could you imagine GoFundMe that she could put on those? Because that was a lot of cash, gold, that would go for the ransoming of Richard. He made it, and he would be king briefly before his unspeakable younger brother. Yes, but That's Richard and the Third Crusade, which is interesting in the sense that you have the Christian king actually sort of working with the Islamic leader. So there is a sense of some kind of agreement. But I wonder about what it was like in Jerusalem. They probably had to have a lot of urban renewal. And, can you imagine? I mean, if you'd been in the holy city, and I hope the tourism picked back up. And we think about that because all of these invasions and attacks and so forth, it had not been very good, but at least now there was some understanding. Now, the irony that following the crusade, and this will be just a few years later, is that these crusaders never made it. Oh, you know how you always say, we're gonna go mañana. We're looking forward to going. We've got it planned, but we've got some other activities. Now, I love Venice. Many of you have been there and you appreciate it, and you may have some wonderful Venetian friends, and I commend you for that. But understand, in this case, some Venetians could be nefarious. Yes, including the Doge. And you say, but isn't he working for Holy Mother Church? Not so much. The Venetians at this stage are working for the Venetians. And apparently, the Venetians had a project for Crusaders. The Crusaders wanted to get what we call funding nowadays. Venetians offered this, but we said, we have a little job for you first. So we need for you to stop off. And this diverted the Crusaders to the area of what we would call Albania, Yugoslavia over there. And while they were over there, these people, they were on ships and so forth. And then they got wind of a dispute in Constantinople over two claimants to the imperial throne. And so they said, why don't we see what's going on? Maybe there'll be some opportunities there. It's like always looking for new opportunities. You say, what's that got to do with Jerusalem? Well, nothing, but we'll just have to postpone that trip. We're going soon. It's like we want to get there because we're so excited about that. But right now, we'll stop in Constantinople. And boy, did they ever get involved. And this Fourth Crusade and the attacks on the city of Constantinople in 1204 are just unbelievable. Obviously, this is clearly contrived, but when you got all the ships coming around there and somehow were able to get inside Constantinople, which many people had tried and failed to do. So this is really the first group, but not the last. When we think of the Turks, 1453, I know, They're gonna get it eventually, but not yet. This is the 1200s. Yeah. So the Westerners come in, and again, all of this penchant for massacre and stealing and all the rest, looting and pillaging, will become part of this Fourth Crusade. For them, I'm sure it was a great time. When you think about the kinds of things they did, and I guess they did not regard these as Christians since they were Byzantine Orthodox and they weren't Catholic. That's just my opinion, because it's hard to imagine they would have desecrated as they did had they comprehended that they were their fellow Christians. You can even see people bowing, these Greeks bowing to these Crusaders. They were, and they didn't care, Jews, or I guess they weren't even Muslims, but Jews and Orthodox, that's irrelevant, just killing and looting and all the rest. So Constantinople went through days, even weeks of that kind. And it is said, I think in your book, it says this would leave as many memories as anything else Westerners did during the Crusades, I should say. In other words, there was never a sense that this had any kind of noble or worthwhile purpose. Interestingly, however, I have to tell you about the Pope of that day, Pope Innocent III. You've heard me speak of him before, 1198 to 1216. Innocent at first condemned these people because they had deviated from the original plan. But not knowing about what these Crusaders had done in Constantinople, but only that the city had fallen to a Crusader army, he sends a letter of congratulations. He said, "You remember in a previous letter, I acted angry at y'all, but I really love you, and I thank you for all you've done. You are wonderful fellows." In other words, the thought that the Patriarch of Constantinople is going to do what to me? Get down. Yeah. And he's not going to say, "I'm as good as you." Oh, no, he's going to do some ring kissing. Well, that big fat one. And for the pontiff, that was very nice. Yes, some eggs had to be broken to create the omelet. But Peter can be happy that now those blankety blank Greeks are going to be obedient. Well, Western rule as such will last several decades. A Westerner will become emperor. I mean, it's not like they're going to say, "Well, as long as you're here, y'all just take over and it'll be okay." No, I don't think it was ever like that. I think always some hostility to have a bunch of Catholics ruling in Constantinople. Although I think if you were Orthodox, you probably had to go to the Catholic Church. Ooh, bummer. Yeah, but I mean, I know you all love each other now, but I mean, back then there was probably some unpleasant memories about what they Westerners had done, but they ruled, and of course, we'll do it our way. In other words, it's not like, well, this will be a Catholic church, and then you can have your Orthodox church down the street. No, it's all going to, and you know what? In Latin too. rub, rub your nose in it. Yeah. Latin, take that, Greeks. I mean, you say, but that's hurtful. Yeah. I think that's part of it. The only thing is good, it won't last. The whole Latin business and the emperor will go on, 1261. That's relatively short. When you think about 1204 to 1261, after we've gotten all those Latin books and probably started making Latin mandatory in school, wouldn't that be great? Yeah. Make them all learn the declensions and conjugations. And but those of you who had Latin, you remember. I know you very sentimental about that. But I just feel like the Greeks, could you imagine? We don't want you. I mean, we love Cicero, all of us, Aeneas and Virgil and Ovid and all the rest. But you know, the Greeks, we got Homer. So what do we need? But there you go, Greek versus Latin. 1261, the Byzantines retake it. And my question has always been, where have these Byzantines been all these years? Where I think this little Greek colony and say, we're going to get it. And, you know, little Greek cheerleaders go get them. Yeah. Rah, rah, sis boom bah, we're going to get it. But they finally did 1261 to 1453. So you can learn that you remember if anybody questions you, the Greeks, because remember 1453 is it. So yeah, so Istanbul, here we come. But until 1453, it will remain Greek. But let's face it, the incredibly shrinking Byzantine Empire, yeah, after massacre, it just goes. So this is not meaning that everything is just hunky-dory. I mean, it's Greek run, so if you are Grecophile, then you can be happy and sad if you're a Latin person, because think of all those Latin books that have to be thrown out. Can you imagine? I mean, if you're a bibliophile, it would be very hurtful, but I'm sure this was like, go Greek. Yeah. Yeah. Alpha and Omega all the way. Yeah. So it's a very, very different situation, isn't it? But let me end by noting, when you think about the ending of this period and you are aware of all that was going on in the world, because the minute the fall of Constantinople to the Turks come, there will no longer be the opportunity for overland travel to the east. And when we think of 1453, my mind, thanks to, I guess, hearing it over and over again as a child, 1492. So there we are. In other words, if we are Western Christians, we have a lot on the agenda. And as nice as it was to have Crusades and all of that, oh gosh, it just doesn't have the priority it used to have. But before I end, suppose they gave a crusade and nobody came. I mean, yeah. How would you feel about that? Does that hurt? It makes you angry. It makes you sad. A plethora of emotions. Well, that's our Pius II. Here he is, surrounded, and there is dates. You say, should we care about Pius II? Well, I don't think it'll be on the quiz show. I don't, if you're ever on Jeopardy, you're safe, but I'll tell you this, he was a poet, humanist, had a nice career and all that. So he thought it would be great in the 15th century for me to have a crusade. He wasn't feeling that well, but he went down to, as you can see, the coast where the Crusaders were supposed to go from. And he died there before the ships ever got there. Did he die of a broken heart? I'll leave you to think about it. But if you ever get asked about Pius II, and you may be, if you have a papal history course, you can just remember that he died there at the site and the ships never came. But I'll come next week and be talking about heresies and friars. Yes. So I'll see you then. Thank you very much, everybody.
We don't want to talk about heresies.